Okay, guys. So let's see. Okay, so let's take a look at how Ronald Reagan leads a change in American government. I would say the first thing is often looked like as a good thing. He had an idea called Reaganomics. Now, whenever you have an economic policy, there are pros and cons. So he definitely had some cons, but I think during his presidency, our economy did very well. So we went from having an economy that was doing very poorly in the late 1970s under Jimmy Carter, and then all of a sudden it starts to do better. Towards the end of his presidency, it starts to take a little bit of a dive because of all the debt we kind of build up. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit. He was the first president in a while to limit the amount of government oversight. What that means is just like having the government less involved in people's lives. And this was a big reason, I think, for the economic boom. So remember, our country was kind of founded on the idea of limited government, meaning the government's really just there to protect your rights. After the Great Depression, the government took a little bit more of an active role in people's lives to prevent things like the Great Depression. And he felt that we were almost going too far. So he wants to kind of scale it down a little bit in terms of, what we do. And what he's probably most known for is ending the Cold War. We'll take a look at that. That'll be your assignment mostly for today. It's been a long run with the Cold War. And it actually, I would say the Cold War ends in a very quick way. I mean, it's a long war. It doesn't make sense, but like it really falls apart quickly for the Soviet Union. They start running out of money very quickly, and they start changing their feel a little bit. But because of his economic policy, that led to us increase the deficit, which, as you guys know, is a huge problem for us still today. We owe a lot of money, $27 trillion right now, and that ball started getting rolling under Reagan a little bit. So, and it hasn't stopped rolling, honestly. It's been like that for like 40 years now. It's going to come and bite us in the butt somewhere in the future, but I'm not a future teacher. I'm a history teacher, so I'll focus on that. All right, going to be a little bit of writing here. 2 slides. This is the first major one. His economic policy is a little different, a little confusing. But before we start taking notes, if you guys can, who remembers what the progressive income tax was? So I'll help you with the income tax. When you work a job, okay, you get taxed on the job when you get your paycheck. I think you guys have seen mine. But who remembers what a progressive income tax is? Because it's important before we go on for today. Okay, Aura, go ahead.
Well, the progressive income is based on how much you earn. If you earn more and more, the amount of taxes you have to pay increases. Good.
So if you don't make a ton of money, you're only going to be taxed like 5 or 10%. If you make a ton of money, you're going to be taxed on your income like, by like 35, 40%. Under Jimmy Carter, you ready for this? The rich got taxed, meaning the people that made the most money got taxed 70 to 80% of their income. So that means if you made $1 million, 700,000 was going to the government. And this really hurt the economy. It also a lot of people didn't really want to make a ton of money because if they made too much, it was just going to get taxed a lot more. So this led to a little bit of an issue. He wants to do the opposite. So what he wants to do, it's called supply side economics. It's also known, if people that don't like it, they'll sometimes call it trickle down economics. But the real term you'll see on the Regents exam is supply side economics. It's the economic theory where taxes on all citizens, including the rich, are lessened and cut. Okay? Now, this is the idea behind it. Okay? His argument was that if you tax the people less, the government will do a little bit less. However, we will live in a more prosperous time. Okay? And his idea was this. If the wealthy people in our country, let's just be honest, those are usually the people who own the corporations, are in charge, they're the bosses. If they have more money and they're not taxed as much, that means more money is going to go into the business. Okay? That means more money is going to go into the corporation. And the idea was, okay, and it turned out to be somewhat true throughout the 1980s. The idea was if you're not taxing them as much, they have more money. What are they going to do? They're going to hire more workers. They're going to make their product better. Okay, if the businesses and corporations don't have a ton of money because they're paying high taxes on it, they get very stringent with the money. Okay, they don't want to spend it. Okay, so what happened was a lot of people started getting jobs. Unemployment was very, very low at this time. People were doing pretty good. Okay, it worked. By the end of Reagan's 2 terms, the economy boomed and around 20 million new jobs were created. So instead of being taxed, let's say if you make $1 million, you'd be in the highest progressive tax bracket. He didn't tax you at 50%, 40%. He taxed you like 25%, 26%. And this meant more money was available to people, and more people got jobs and had success in the economy from that aspect. Okay, but there's also a catch with it. Okay, I've asked you the question numerous times: if you want the government, if you want like free college, if you want free healthcare, if you want Social Security, taxes are going to go up. Okay, the opposite happens. If you want less taxes, the government's going to do a little bit less for you. Okay, so welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, these things that we looked at, Social Security, less money went into it. And that has its pros and cons. All right. His movement was known as a conservative revolution. He was a Republican, and Republicans generally want to spend a little bit less and not do as much to provide for people. They want people to kind of work it out on their own. And it has its pros and cons. Like laissez-faire has its pros and cons. Okay, so Reagan also believed that there was no reason to have the government as involved in the economy. He doesn't want it like the 1920s where they're not completely involved at all. But if it has to do with money, he wants to be as limited as possible. Okay, he wants people and the country to make money on their own. And a lot of people really did. They did a good job. Okay, so he overall lessened government regulation. Okay, regulation means control. A person like FDR raised government regulation. Lyndon B. Johnson raised government regulation. Jimmy Carter raised government regulation. That means the government's more having more oversight when it comes to things dealing with the economy and things along those lines. All right, and this little cartoon over here: if you cut taxes on the rich, they'll invest that money and create jobs for everyone. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but that's the idea. Okay, if the goal of when maybe you guys own businesses when you get older, or you're a part of owning a company, you want to try and bring as much money as possible, and the more money you bring in, okay, hopefully you're using it for the right things to create jobs and create a better product in business, and people aren't too greedy, right? They don't take that money all for themselves. That's one of the downfalls of capitalism, is when people are too greedy. But the 1980s was an economic boom. All right, when he ran for president, okay, and I usually judge presidents how they do in elections. So like Jimmy Carter ran for re-election, okay, in 1980. I'll go back to that slide. He ran for re-election in 1980. He lost 489 electoral votes to like 48, 49. He got crushed. He lost by 400 votes. When Reagan runs for re-election, okay, he's going to put up over 500 electoral votes. So obviously the country wanted to change in 1980. Okay, when Jimmy Carter ran for re-election, he got crushed. All right, so that usually tells me as a history teacher that people didn't really like him too much. Not saying he did everything bad. All right, when the next president comes in, he seems to do a little bit of a better job. And then when he runs for re-election, he wins by even more votes. One of the biggest landslides in American political history. Him, George Washington, are like the two. He had over 500 electoral vote victories. So he had a huge success in the 1984 election as well. And that's usually a key to basically for people to know that they like what's going on. All right. Does anyone need more time? You know what I just realized? I can't believe it's taken me this long. I'm sometimes such a bad teacher. All I have to do is just do this. Like, I want you guys to copy the notes, obviously, but I could have always just... so on the ball sometimes, and then sometimes I'm just not. What's today's date? We're almost in June. I just realized I could do that. 5/27. Well, better late than never. All right. So you guys have the notes there. Ultimately, we'll take a look at some Regents questions. It's a little complicated, but I think if you guys understand the progressive income tax, and we're not going to tax the rich as much, And that idea is, you know what? Maybe they'll put that money into the country, and they did. All right, but sometimes it doesn't happen. All right, there's merits to taxing the rich a little bit more, and there's downsides, and vice versa. Okay, hopefully you guys are seeing that with my class. There's always two sides to everything. It's very easy to think your viewpoint's always 100% correct, and I make that mistake too sometimes, but it's always a little more complicated than you think. All right, President Ronald Reagan used the concept of supply-side economics when he proposed what? Okay, one is correct, yes. Reducing income taxes to stimulate growth. Okay, people got taxed less. That made people happy because they had a lot more of their own money. And this was something that people liked. All right, so in his first inaugural address, I'll just read it to you, and then you can kind of gather what's going on. In the present crisis, this is the gas shortage and the economic crisis under the end of Jimmy Carter. Government is not the solution to our problems. It is my intention to curb the size and influence of the federal establishment and to demand recognition of the distinction between the powers granted to the federal government and those reserved to the states or the people. There's your 10th Amendment reference. All of us need to be reminded that the federal government did not create the states created the federal government. So President Ronald Reagan is talking about what? Good. 4 is correct. Reduce government regulation of business. Reduce just government in general. Government's going to do less. He wants the states to take more control of things and doesn't want the government providing as much. Okay, so less taxes means more government oversight. More taxes usually mean more government oversight, and this is one of those examples. Not always, but a good chunk of the time. Okay, Regents reminder. Okay, there's not a do now, but East and West Germany were separated after the Cold. Oh my goodness, how bad am I sometimes? Oh my goodness. Don't mind this. Amazing. How many mistakes I make sometimes. All right, let's try that again. East and West Berlin were separated after the Cold War. Describe how East and West Berlin were separated. Who remembers what separated the two sides? Abigail, tell me.
Well, the Berlin Wall, but do you want to know like what was happening with each side, East and West?
I think it'd be good to remind everyone if you remember. If you remember, that's great.
I think the United States and Britain were watching East, and the Soviets were watching West. But I don't really remember that well.
Yep, East Berlin's closer to the Soviet Union, so the Soviet Union was watching East Berlin, and then we and Britain were watching West Berlin, okay? And if you remember from the Oversimplified, a lot of people from East Berlin, thank you, Anicia, Alina, Ariel, Aura, and Abigail, the people in East Berlin saw a more capitalist society in West Berlin, so they started moving over to West Berlin. So they created the wall to keep East Berliners in, okay? And this became a symbol of the Cold War because even though they're the same city, they're separated by a wall and you can't leave or enter the place. So even though your family might be in West Berlin, it doesn't matter. It's a separate government. It's a separate ruler. And if you try and pass through Berlin via the Berlin Wall and try and jump over, you're pretty much shot and killed on the spot. There's like a handful of people who ever made it through 30 years. So ultimately, you weren't getting over there. All right, and Ronald Reagan was the president at the time that helped kind of negotiate and broker what happened next. Okay, and this is kind of known as the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, this is way oversimplified. We're actually going to spend time on this on Monday. We're going to really see what happens to the Soviet Union. If you remember in the 1970s, they really started losing a ton of money. And again, I'll say this, as honestly as I can. In a communist society, when there's not a ton of money around and you're sharing not a ton of money and the government has to provide a lot more for people, that puts a huge strain on the government and its people. In a capitalist society, you could be in an economic crisis, but there still could be people and jobs that are available. Like when COVID hit, okay, a lot of businesses went out, but there were still businesses doing really well. Supermarkets did great under COVID, right? If you were in the medical profession, you did great. If you were a part of Amazon getting all of these deliveries, you did great. So there was still things. But when a communist society, when they're putting all of the money kind of into the middle figuratively, and now they have to provide all these things for people, it becomes a big mess really quickly. But copy down why the fall of the Berlin Wall is significant. Strong allies? No. It's a very complicated relationship. I mean, very complicated. I would say we lean more enemies as friends, but we're not like enemies, and we're certainly not friends. I think they're the person like in the class that like you don't really like deep down, but you don't show it. I don't know if that makes sense, but we don't really get along with them so well. Yeah, frenemies. There you go. But I would say in the 90s, we were pretty good. Some things happened in the 2000s and 2010s where, the relationship got a little tough. Some of the decisions we made and they made, strained the relationship a little bit, but it ain't the Cold War, trust me. All right. I'll come back to this slide. I want to just show this YouTube video really quick. I'm just curious if you guys have ever seen this or heard of this speech. This is one of the biggest speeches of Reagan's presidency. So let's take a look. I'm not sure if you've seen it before. Write in the chat if you have or heard of it maybe.
And now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness. Some political prisoners have been released. Certain foreign news broadcasts are no longer being jammed. Some economic enterprises have been permitted to operate with greater freedom from state control. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state, or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West or to strengthen the Soviet system without changing it? We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And now...
Okay, so Mr. Gorbachev is the new Soviet premier. You'll learn all about him on Monday. He basically says, I'm happy you're doing all of these things and being more open and not being as authoritative. There's one thing you could do that could show you're really true about this, and he basically demands for the Soviet prime minister, the premier, to tear down the wall. And you know what the Soviet prime minister ends up doing? He ends up tearing the Berlin Wall down. Okay, he allows it to be knocked down. People in East Berlin, West Berlin meet for the first time in over 30 years. You can imagine what that's like. You know, picture being friends with someone at PS 89. There's a wall separating you. Haven't seen them in 30 years, and you go see them. It'd be really cool. Great question. I'm going to give you the official name because it's confusing. Type of Russian government. They're considered a federal republic, but they don't have a true president like we do. All right, so they have elections, but I would definitely say the elections are not like ours. They have a prime minister. Okay, you know, Vladimir Putin's the prime minister today, and they're sometimes known as a federation, which is a little bit different as well. But ultimately, they're a republic like us, but they have still a lot. They don't have like a Bill of Rights. They're a lot more authoritative still in that aspect. So they're not exactly like us, but they follow our model a little bit because they believe the, you know, communist economic system failed and they wanted to try and have more openness, and they changed. All right, so they're definitely more capitalist now too. All right. So since the Soviet Union and communism was getting weaker over the 70s and 80s, Reagan demanded the Soviets tear down the Berlin Wall and liberate Germany. And this is just the first step. Over a span of 2-3 years, you're going to see a lot of places the Soviet Union controlled. Romania, I believe Albania is in that area too. Belarus, Ukraine, Crimea, these places that were under Soviet Union control just were no longer under it. And this is all kind of wrapped up by 1991, but the fall of the Berlin Wall is like that moment where the Cold War ended. And anytime you see a Regents questions on the fall of the Berlin Wall, my second year we had a question on the fall of the Berlin Wall, I think every student got it right because it's always like the same answer. Which event is most closely associated with the end of the Cold War? Obviously, the answer is going to be 4, and this is that significant moment. Okay, and it was not just America beating the Soviet Union, which obviously is important. It was, you know, capitalism beating communism, democracy beating, and republic beating a more authoritative dictator type of country, you know, rights and freedom winning over control. And that's an important thing. You know, I don't, there's merits to every government and there's cons to every government and economic system. But I think having rights and having choice, you know, I think in the long run is a winning formula. All right. So anything else here? Nope. Okay. So I'm going to go now to the assignment. I try to make it somewhat short. I know you guys obviously have a test tomorrow. That's not where we should be. Here we go. Obviously, you guys have a test tomorrow. If you need to go back to anything, you could just go back to lesson 14. There's a quizzes there too. And, you know, obviously you could do that. But for today's assignment that you just got to finish up, please do the reading on the Berlin Wall. Okay, 7 questions, answer them from in the Google Doc here. All right, no one go anywhere because obviously I'll have to take attendance still, and just let me know if you need me. I'm sorry, Neve. I only gave 7 this year. I guess 8 if you count the final. It's not horrible. Well, the midterm really is 9. 10 if you count some of the bigger quizzes. 12, 11, you know. Getting you ready for high school, I guess. I gave a ton more in person. You guys, I think, not lucked out, you know, because obviously you're living through a tough time, but I think you guys got a lot less assignments. You had 2 less essays. Not bad. All right, so this is actually the least amount of tests I gave, but it's tough. 50 questions, multiple choice, never easy, especially on a Friday when it's so nice out, but you guys can do it. I know you can.